Yeah, my name is Charles Kronengold. I teach music history and do research on music history. My main areas are 20th century music and later 20th century, 21st century music, and I do some work on film. And my music stuff is both on classical music and popular music. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question how much things change and at what rates, and whether things are changing more quickly now than they used to be. I don't know. In some ways, it's hard to say that the changes over the last 10 years are qualitatively different from the changes that happened earlier. I mean, there's a lot of changes, but there's always been a lot of changes. The most recent set of changes is that music is becoming portable in ways that didn't used to be true. And it's just become sort of multi-platform in ways that didn't used to be the case. And now people don't really care about that as much. I mean, they care more about access, and they care more about making their own playlists, personalizing how they listen to music. And that seems to be a kind of a revolution, Yeah, that was but again, that's something that goes back a long way. I mean, in American popular music, that was a huge thing in the 50s, the rock and roll stuff. You know about this? How with people like Elvis and stuff, there were major questions about, whether this counted as good music or not. And nowadays you look back on him and you see he was a very talented musician, did work really hard, and all these guys like Little Richard, they really did care about, what they were doing musically. But at the time, because the records sounded more raw, they didn't have that sweetened kind of studio sound with all the strings and everything that pop songs usually had in the 40s and 50s. People, listened to these records and were sort of taken aback by how sort of simplified the sounds were, how raw they were, how much distorted guitars and things like that changed the just nature of what it is to listen to a record. And in any period, it's something where people are going to question the basic components, like hip hop, is this music? They're just talking. Well, no, they're not just talking. They're change. And that's gone on for about. I guess you start to really notice that shift in maybe the mid-'80s, where people were just kind of moving away from having the live rhythm section, with the guitar and live keyboards and bass and drums and stuff, toward just keyboards and drum machines and things like that, electronic keyboards and drum machines. It's gotten to the point, in the last 10, 15 years where you don't really need to have instruments, live instruments or musicians playing things live to make, records that are really successful. I guess the difference is that now it's kind of optional, you can either have it or not. It's not necessary to have live instruments, but there's still something special about it for people when you do have it. You don't really have to worry about preserving the recordings, because that's one thing about the way people get music now, that it's so easy to find the most obscure classical pieces on YouTube or Spotify. I mean, so it's not like these things are going to go away. So they're accessible. The question is are you also trying to preserve people learning to read music and play instruments in schools? I mean, that's been under attack for 60, 70 years. Taking that away, there's a cultural loss there, and I don't know if that's ever going to come back in public schools, and I think in the private schools you still have that a bit. Yeah, there's going to have to be some agreement that we need to keep spending money on this as a culture, and that it's important to expose children to it when they're young, and I hope it happens.